Tak my vás dobrý den, vítáme zpět tady v této dnešní...
Hello, welcome you back in...
Druhý panel, který je pojmenován jako Audit kultury. A ještě než začne, tak nás pozdraví v přetočených záběrech dvě osobnosti.
Já bych si ještě dovolila vrátit se k naší přestávce. Jestli vám vrtalo některým hlavou, co je tam, jaký účel má animace Rudolfína, kterou jste mohli 45 minut v klidu svých domovů a obrazovek sledovat, tak já to ráda vysvětlím. Tato konference byla původně organizována ve spolupráci právě s Galerií Rudolfinum, kde nás inspirovala výstava Unplugged, která právě dnes měla hostit naši konferenci. To bylo ještě dlouho před současným nouzovým stavem a my jsme se museli v nouzi právě odsunout s naší konferencí a s naším přenosem do plzeňského depa. Ale právě vděčíme hodně Galerii Rudolfinum a této zajímavé podnětné výstavě za inspiraci k i tomuhle druhému bloku, tomu auditu kultury. Ještě se k tomu za chvíli samozřejmě vrátíme, ale já jsem aspoň cítila potřebu vám vysvětlit, jaká je ta souvislost.
Ano, a já vás tedy po této polední pauze znovu vítám do konference Střed zájmů kultura v nové realitě, která tedy, jak už bylo řečeno, probíhá z plzeňského depa díky tedy tomuto online prostředí, které nahradilo tedy tyto dříve možné klasické standardní formáty konferencí a v tom onlineovém prostředí budeme muset setrvat a budeme v nich moci přivítat i naše živé hosty, nejenom ty dva předtočené příspěvky, které nás teď čekají, ale budou nás čekat hosté hned po nich, kterými budou ředitel Moravské galerie v Brně Jan Press, choreograf, kreativní producent JAD Productions Yemi, umělecký šéf HaDivadla Ivan Buraj, dokumentarista, essayista a pedagog Vít Janeček a kritička umění Anežka Bartlová.
A teď poprosíme o první videopříspěvek, který přednese pan Luigi Sacco, který je profesorem kulturní ekonomie a zabývá se studiem hodnoty kultury v rozličných uměních, počínaje podnikatelským sektorem se zvláštním zaměřením na její relevanci v současných korporátních mechanismech a z hlediska společenské odpovědnosti. Pan Luigi Sacco.
Hello, I am very happy to have an opportunity to speak about the perspectives of the future evolution of cultural and creative sectors in this moment of crisis, and I am particularly happy to do this in the context of the Czech culture and creative industry, because there has been a long relationship that has linked me to the Czech creative innovation environment, and so it's really nice to be able to share my thoughts on this topic with this community now. I think that what we are observing today, of course, is a massive disruption of cultural and creative sectors. And this is certainly due to the pandemic crisis. But it's also important to recognize that some of the ongoing changes were already happening before the actual pandemic crisis. And in many respects, what's happening is been an acceleration of these trends. And clearly, the disruption of so many creative businesses has not only further accelerated the pace of change, but also, and also painfully, created a new space for innovative approaches to cultural and creative production. So, what are the challenges that lie ahead? One aspect that is clearly very important is that this huge disruption has, of course, had very profound social consequences. So one of the aspects for the future will be to weave together again the social fabric, how to make people interact and to reconstruct their personal relationships, and especially to do this in the public space, in situations of, let's say, shared cultural exchange and more generally social exchange. From this point of view, I think that an innovative use of digital technologies to create, for example, new social platforms, which are not simply social media, but really social exchange spaces, a sort of, let's say, digital version of what's happening, for example, in the physical space of the cultural institution, can be a very important line of further development that could also pave the way to very important cultural innovations in the social sphere. Of course, we will return to the public spaces. We will return to physical interaction. But it's also true that some aspects of this interaction are changing in irreversible ways. And this means that, for example, much of the social exchange will be further accelerated in its digital dimension, not simply in the sense of just sharing content, but also developing new forms of interaction. The fact that of course, so many interactions today happen on digital platforms like Zoom is changing our way of structuring relationships, creating agendas. So the point is passing from what is today basically a communication platform for instrumental reasons like just holding meetings or webinars into something that can really help people interact also in situations in which for example, mobility is relatively limited, or let's say safety standards are not completely restored yet. This can also be a way of overcoming some of the traditional limitations of physical interaction. For example, the fact that in this way we can really interact in a very close way with people living on the other side of the world, starting new forms, for example, on exchange related to culture and creative content. So, from this point of view, I really think that there is the space for a wave of social innovation, culturally mediated by a smart deployment of technological possibilities today that could probably generate new services for social connectivity, for management of mental health issues, for example, that could spark a new generation of radical innovation that in some sense could be the analog for the new decade of what has been for example, the smart use of technology in the golden years of development of the Silicon Valley in the 90s, the social demand for meaning and for culture as a mediator of meaning, as a generator of meaning to address issues of social isolation and mental health will become a crucial point. But there are also other aspects that are very important. One is, for example, the creative fusion between cultural platforms and educational platforms. Again, education has been clearly under stress in this particular period of pandemic-related lockdowns. And of course, so there has been an emergency resort to digital technology to substitute for physical training and physical education in real classrooms. But again, some of the potential of this can survive the emergency perspective and can become something that probably leads towards an exchange and an integration between cultural and educational venues, because the problem of education is that it's increasingly seen as instrumental, for example, or improving your job opportunities. But we know that good education is an education that builds an intrinsic motivation. So from this point of view, an interesting and innovative blending of cultural participation and education can really reinforce reciprocally in the sense that we can inflate new energy, new, let's say, new heat, so to speak, into the educational platforms. And at the same time, the educational dimension can help us build the new competencies to improve our access to culture and creative contents. And what has been happening, for example, in countries like South Korea, in terms of the innovative crossover between culture and education, for example, and the consequent flourishing of the creative economy of South Korea, I think is an eloquent example of the possibilities that are out there. So there are, I think, in spite of the big challenges that we are facing, there is a really, really interesting panorama for new opportunities and a real need to encourage a new generation of creative entrepreneurs that are able to interpret these new challenges in new ways. From this point of view, I am confident that a place like Czech Republic, where already today there is a huge attention to the smart use of advanced technologies, could become, and by the way, a strong entrepreneurial culture that is really upscaling very quickly, I think that this is one of the ideal environments in which we could observe such a flourishing. And so I really look forward to exploring the possibilities that will be disclosed in the next few years. And I hope that also conferences like this can be an inspiration and a kickoff for new entrepreneurs willing to move in this direction. So thank you so much, and looking forward to the developments.
My děkujeme také. To byl profesor Luigi Sacco, profesor kulturní ekonomie na Mezinárodní univerzitě of Languages and Media v Miláně. Tak jsem to přeložil tak trochu na půl. Každopádně on také spolupracuje s úřady veřejné správy, jako jsou například Správa uměleckých a kulturních statků a muzeí, velké kulturní akce a územní rozvoj, územní plánování, kultura a transformace měst. Často působí také jako konzultant pro národní a regionální vlády, organizace a kulturní instituce. Publikuje v časopisech a také má za sebou celou řadu knížek.
Nedávno byla publikovaná studie, která se jmenuje Kulturní šok COVID-19, které je Luigi Sacco spoluautorem a která se právě věnuje situaci kreativního sektoru v době pandemie. Je to studie, kterou vypracoval pro OECD země a najdete ji v českém překladu na webových stránkách kanceláře Kreativní Evropa. Je to důležitý materiál, o který se můžeme opírat v těchto časech v oblasti, kterou právě sledujeme, a tou je kultura a kultura v nové realitě. Dalším příspěvkem, který uvodí přímo tematicky náš druhý blok Audit kultury, přednese v takovém zamyšlení Vít Korecký, který je kurátorem a manažerem Galerie Rudolfinum, a v kulisách té výstavy, o které jsem hovořila před příspěvkem pana Luigi Sacca, nám vlastně odpovídá na otázky, jimiž bychom se chtěli zabývat právě v tomto panelu. Nad významem a povahou kulturních institucí právě v těch nejistých časech změny a transformace. Takže Vít Korecký a jeho zamyšlení v kulisách výstavy Unplugged.
Kulturní instituce v době nejistot. Myslím si, že vlastně nejistota je nějaký stav, který je výborný jako výchozí pro vlastně nejenom anticipaci, ale už jako nejdřív promyšlení, ale potom vlastně udělání nějakých změn. Ta změna je trvalý proces, ta změna není něco dočasného, který, jako když se zapouzdří instituce, tak to vydrží a přejde to, protože buď jí takzvaně ujede vlak, anebo zjistí, že ty body, o které se opírala, už vlastně neexistují. Instituce, jakákoliv, pro nás kulturní teď, vlastně na jednu stranu reprezentuje nějakou jistotu, nějaký zázemí, nějakou ochranu vlastně nějakých hodnot, které jsou vybraný, předvybraný, a na druhou stranu ale by měla a musí, aby byla srozumitelná a aby tyhle ty hodnoty chránila nikoliv nějakým konzervačním způsobem, ale aby je dokázala předávat dál a nabízet je veřejnosti, tak musí být progresivní. Musí nějakým způsobem být kreativní, protože když nebude kreativní, tak je to nějaká položka v šuplíku. Tu instituci tady máme proto, aby byla součástí našeho života, aby nám možná i vlastně pomáhala trochu rozečíst, co se stane v naší blízké budoucnosti. Tady je vlastně důležité říct, že ta kulturní instituce je součást našeho života. Není to něco odtrženého od toho, jak žije veřejnost, jak žijeme, a někde bokem, někde na straně stojí nějaká budova nebo nějaký téma. Ta kulturní instituce je především vytváření vztahu. Je to vztah mezi různýma participantama. Tradičně bychom mohli říct umělec a veřejnost, ale on je ten vztah vlastně širší, protože ten život kolem je komplexní a ovlivňuje nás třeba stav životního prostředí, ovlivňuje nás mezinárodní politika. A ta instituce tyhle témata nějakým způsobem musí vstřebávat a reflektovat. Takže jakoby vztah mezi veřejností, nějakým profesionálním zázemím té instituce a těma aktuálníma společenskýma tématama, o kterých se podle svého oboru dovídáme víc nebo méně zvenčí, tak ta instituce je vlastně kulturní, má nějakým způsobem reflektovat nebo artikulovat, dávat prostor umělcům, který se těmihle tématama zabývají a připravovat vlastně nebo pomáhat těm umělcům vlastně jako předat nějakou zprávu. Ta zpráva vlastně od umělců, kulturní instituce je spíš zázemí pro umělce, než že by to byl jako svět sám pro sebe. Tak ta zpráva od těch umělců je mnohdy velmi emocionální. Není vlastně to žádná faktografie mnohdy. Takže tam ta instituce musí trochu pomáhat vytvářet to prostředí. A je to nějakým způsobem jako ta vztahovost je o vlastně nějaký interaktivitě. Vlastně strašně důležitý nástroj nebo téma pro kulturní instituci je experiment. Myslím si, že speciálně v době takzvaných změn nebo nejistot je experiment něco, čeho bychom se měli méně bát než obvykle, protože když to prostředí je proměněný a ta všednodenní realita na nás klade vlastně nároky porozumět tomu, co se změnilo.
Change and see what's changed in real life. It means to experiment. The cultural institution, when representing certain stability and protection of the values, the institution doesn't have to fear to get into the unknown field. When one says it's something new, alternative, it's just for the performers. We should stick to the values, then the performers will go away and the society in itself. What's the mission of a cultural institution? Let me exaggerate. It's trying to intermediate the future and thinking about future. The tools the cultural institution is using are backed up by something that are certain and sure. We should revise what from the probed already is coming from the past. It's linked to institutional criticism, a revision of the status quo, of what we are standing upon, and if something is shaking or moving away, the institution should have different pillars, not just static values, but the institution should provide more space to inspire the live art, the new impetus and stimulus. I don't want to be promoting destabilization. It probably sounds like that in general. But when the institution will be again standing on its pillars and change will shift the pillars or move the pillars away, then the institution will collapse. Experience is a set of fixed points and also myth and ideas, visions, wishes. So the experience is consisting of abstract ideas or what we can put into our hands, hoping that we have real life, reality in our hands, touching it. The institution should work in the same serious manner and with the same affection when talking about tangibles and intangibles, when the reality is something tangible and partly intangible. I mean, ideas or projects, then the person can come with and meet the cultural institution, and then you might hope that it's functioning, that the institution is part of life, and one can work with the intangible items. It might sound too abstract to you. Let me refer to more focus upon participation. The institution probes and provides to the artists for some cultural tasks that as an output have something intangible. This action is part of reality in itself. A responsibility of cultural institution, it's just a parallel to responsibility of an individual. When the individual won't be testing new territories, new tasks, then the cultural institution wouldn't survive well. How should I express it? If we behave responsibly, it means we are probing new territories. If we don't explore new territories, we are not behaving responsibly. So it was Mr. Korecký's video statement. I would like to welcome you again at our conference, The New Reality for Culture, Ms. Návratová and Ondřej Cihlář. We look forward to our live panelists who will be remotely linked to the studio. The second panel will be lasting about 90 minutes. It's called Audit of Culture, and next to the topics, we have the following text. Cultural institutions have been affected as the first ones, and probably in its full scope. Many of them made use of digital space, to which they moved their activities and started to reconsider their future direction and missions. Does the overheated economy imply that the culture is overheated too? Has there not been too many cultural projects at a time? And what about quality? How should it be measured, sustained, or raised? How is the current situation perceived by cultural managers? To what extent are they able to get through an audit, which would examine the mission of their organizations? What does the current situation mean for donors? For those who decide on subsidies and grants? What should be supported in the field of arts and culture in the future, and under what condition?
Jimiž budou Anežka Bartlová, kunsthistorička,
Bartlová, art historian, Jan Press, the director of the Moravian Gallery in Brno, Yemi, choreographer and creative producer, Vít Janeček, documentary maker, teacher and producer, and Ivan Buraj, the artistic director of a theater. First to speak will be Anežka Bartlová, who studied art history at the School of Liberal Arts of the Charles University, and now she is a PhD student, and she is also the author of the documentary which is well known to us, and she was the in-house editor of a journal. She also focuses on feminist issues and the interaction in public space. And in 2014, she earned the award by Jirasova. Hello. We'd like to ask you for your contribution. If you want to actually say a few words at the beginning, then we'd like to ask you for that. Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. I have not prepared a speech and I do not represent any institution, and that's why I would like to actually rather leave the space to other participants, for instance, David Korecký. Okay, that is well possible, but we were thinking that you would probably have some opening around about the review of missions and the role of cultural institutions, but we might give the floor to Jan Press, the director of the Moravian Gallery in Brno, who could say something about the current health crisis or the climate crisis as well, and he could also say something about the role of the gallery. He actually studied at the liberal arts faculty of Masaryk University in Brně. He also worked in Moravské Galerie, which is now headed by him. Hello. Mr. Press, can you hear us? Well, it seems to be some technical glitch because Mr. Press is not present on our monitors. Well, we will try to actually get in touch to him later. Now we will actually speak with Yemi, choreographer and creative producer of JAD Productions. He actually flies between the Czech Republic and the US a lot, and he is the founder of a very successful live marketing agency in Europe, and he also organizes events for Mercedes-Benz and Google, and he also been working for Saturday Night Live, or also has been awarded a number of music awards. We can hear each other great. Well, we might actually ask you the same question. How did you redefine your activity as a representative of a cultural organization, because you work in the cultural sector, and then we can speak about climate? Well, as not to delay matters, I have a prepared speech. It is not a surprise that we actually will have to work in live stream for some time in the future. We had to adapt as Dance Academy Prague, which is a studio of 150 students, and then we have even more open class students, and we had to actually switch to live stream. What is a challenge? The challenge is posed towards the teachers, actually, because the teachers, they know something, they knew how to teach in present classes, but now they had to adapt to new things. And this activity of ours, meaning we had to actually stop teaching in person and had to go online, and due to that we could maintain the community of our students, and even the students between themselves could maintain relations. And we actually wrote up a case study on this topic, and then we actually applied for competition And this is where we entered this case study, and I hope you will be able to hear the video, which I will try to actually give you here.
London or Singapore. Their teams have won multiple championships, and their students star in music videos and movies. They also appeared recently alongside Orlando Bloom and Cara Delevingne in Amazon Prime series Carnival Row. Due to the Czech government restrictions caused by the pandemic, the school was forced to close its premises and send over 150 students home on March 9th, and that's where this story begins. Teachers and management from the school turned to us with a goal to launch a 3-month pop-up virtual dance studio. Our deadline was 1 week. On March 16th, something amazing happened. Students, parents, their kids, and many new clients all connected via live stream, and the school doubled the number of attendees just in their first week, all corona risk-free. This gave us confidence to offer free dance classes not only to their student community, but to all families and dance fans across the country who were on home lockdown. We are grateful to our next client, T-Mobile, which decided to reallocate funds from upcoming events that had been canceled and to cover all costs of this project. For many students, the training sessions offer not only a drill to keep their skills sharp, but also an escape from reality, which contributes to their healthy state of mind. We believe that as long as people can dance, they can overcome anything.
Takže teď se zase zeptáme, jestli se slyšíme.
Now I'll ask you whether you hear me. Yes, we heard the video, which was in English. There were some glitches, but we understood what was going on. Oh, that's good. I'm trying to be a good DJ. This is the lesson learned due to the pandemic situation. Well, you should.
Potom, než teď se přesuneme k dalším řečníkům, ale otázky, které tady budeme řešit.
Well, we would like to also give the floor to others. Jan Press is amongst us, the director of the Moravian Gallery. And we will ask you about the courage of cultural institutions and about the courage, how an institution could redefine its role. And we have heard that the role of an experiment is important. Now I'd like to ask you about your take on the topic and whether you, as the Moravian Gallery, have been doing it. Please unmute your mic, otherwise we can't hear each other. Okay, now Jan Press is unmuted. For such institutions as the Moravian Gallery, this is not a new situation because we are actually very closely related to artists. And we actually also participate in the creative sector, being those designers and our other artists. That means that, of course, we experiment. This is part and parcel of our work. And however, our role is now being a bit undermined by new developments. And I have heard the notion that the economy is overheated and probably the cultural sector is overheated too, and this is something that we were aware of earlier, and that's why we actually addressed the topics such as sustainability and carbon footprint, and that's why we actually already did an audit of our carbon footprint. We actually monitored the organization of an exhibition in terms of producing a carbon footprint. We built a solar power station, and it was not just an empty gesture. We wanted to find out how far we would have to change as an institution in order to be sustainable in our activity. Facing the COVID situation, we now know that museums and galleries, which work a bit differently because they are very closely related with artists, we have started, or we have embraced the digital platforms, and some exhibitions now are on digital platforms. 3D guided tours are created by outsourced agencies for us. We have to work now in a different mode. We can actually offer the exhibitions for free. And there are some ways which are redundant and which can now be addressed online. We can also offer many activities in a digital format. What I want to say is that we do not need to present ourselves only by physical exhibitions. That means that we are now trying to rationalize our operation. We used to organize huge exhibition blockbusters, or rather other galleries would organize such exhibition blockbusters, and we saw that they were actually not efficient, and that is why we learned our lesson, and we are trying to actually go another way. So these are the issues which are addressed by us, and I have already mentioned offering our exhibitions for free. The reason was that we could do that with permanent exhibitions, and in order to make such permanent exhibitions accessible to the broad public. And we are trying to actually come up with something that is suitable to our activities. Those are our activities nowadays.
We tried to focus on free events. We have called it a football team, and we want to have 11 performers and artists and purchase their works of art, especially female artists, their paintings and objects. And those would be ways how to support modern arts. You might have seen our offers for acquisitions, and you could see the call, and we don't have to use traditional ways, spending a lot of money on some virtual tours of exhibitions. That would be all from my side. The Moravian Gallery director from Brno, Mr. Jan Press. So you revise ideas whether you would be organizing separate exhibitions. Mr. Josef Čapek already mentioned it in his article, more exhibitions, less art, and vice versa. Thank you for your statement, and I would like to invite Vít Janeček, director, teacher, and essay writers at Prague Academy of Modern Arts, and he has been heading the studios at the English department of that very art faculty, and also UNESCO Council member. And with his wife, Zona Piusic, he founded D1 Film. And since 2015, they have documentary projects. Hello, Mr. Janeček is representing an area of film, so that we have the cultural sector more versatile. We would like to ask Mr. Janeček to hear his views on the climate linked to his profession. I didn't prepare anything. I'll be speaking off the cuff and linking it to the previous panel that was more in terms of anthropological, philosophical. We talked about events. We have heard connection of those with culture. Our experience of urban culture is linked to seeing culture being taken away from daily life. What has happened with digitalization and media channels, the borderline is diluted in our mobile, or, from the screen we can have certain flows. And the pandemic crisis, with its melting and slowdown, is getting us back to distinguishing the normal and festive time. So we are dedicating more attention to it, so that we are able to do something unusual or out of ordinary. Secondly, in the previous morning panel, people talked about regions, countryside, towns, big cultural differences as well. And those cultural differences via the media era are getting deeper. The volksculture that was operating within local traditions or seasonal cycles is now intermediated via PC or TV screen that is present in every household. So now there is new competition in terms of professionalism and spontaneous attempts to perform and create within your own small region. So people from the countryside were moving previously to the towns or cities. That was my first comment. Second comment towards the institutions and how to face the challenges. When talking about kinematography, obviously we have some representatives from theaters, from fine arts, music. There is deeper transformation compared to the other areas. And the reason is that the cinematography, being dependent upon technical economic base, has created some centralized structures in the West as well. And those robust structures integrated a lot of artistic professions and organizational types of professions that created the content, like films as an output or audiovisual production. What has happened? And it's specific for the cinematography, was total dismantling of those structures. It didn't happen in theater, in music, in cultural institutions, museums, you name it. Orchestras, theaters remained. People who work there are still employees. They operate as employee projects. And from film industry, everyone shifted to project-based system that obviously functions in fine arts. And it either depends upon culture or grants and opportunities for grants. So now in the past 10 years, there is a consolidation going on in the state fund of cinematography, and it produces funds and co-production projects for creating new infrastructure. Slowly, the guerrilla companies and firms try to consolidate themselves into larger entities. And simultaneously, there are a lot of aspects for expensive productions and films. The structure we have in the Czech Republic is the challenge that we face jointly with COVID pandemics, so that we should experiment with small formats so that there wouldn't be productions of 150 million Czech crowns. That used to be normal standard. No one was disputing in the past. So that we should contemplate upon it whether there wouldn't be a new way of theme, topic, and intensiveness, and to replace it with some local, low-budget perspective that will be overcoming the current poor conditions. That was the second comment. And thirdly, linking it to a comment of Mr. Jan Press, which was excellent. I loved it. How various things converge into a gallery, and the convergence of live and non-live items show new necessity that might be a new benefit to make it more precise. At the analog era, we were used that we have one screen TV, another screen PC, third player. And nowadays we see convergence of technology, everything into one model, into one case, where a lot of applications are going on at the same time. And I believe that in this way, what we observe in one segment of the whole cycle, like films coming to the cinemas 10 years ago, they were screened for 3 weeks, last year for 2 weeks, and then they disappear nowadays after 1 week screening. So it goes into the core of the essence. A lot of diversification and opening up. I think Minister of Culture, Mr. Zaorálek, came with the idea of libraries, which don't have to be just places for lending books, but there might be lectures, other events going on in there, and museums as well. I believe that the challenge of the pandemic is how to converge more things into one space and to forget the one-sidedness of one function and open up for multifunctionality. I probably talked too long and too complicated. My apologies for that. No worries, you are excused. We will definitely come back to it. The COVID pandemic is a big challenge. Vít, you have been following it up. And there was one term, the urge of the pandemic situation that doesn't seem to be so urgent compared to climate change, and how culture and various types of culture should react in longer term horizon. The pandemic crisis probably will be shorter compared to climate urging change. I think we will be coming back to it, especially when talking about the attempt of sustainable growth, how our society is spending more, not only about physical items, but the cycle of entertainment and culture is shortening, as you have mentioned in the example of screening films. We will all come back to it in the whole discussion. I'll be happy to involve the choreographer Yemi, how he perceives it in connection with the American market, and allow me to welcome Ivan Buraj. Just to add that as of 2015, he is the director of HaDivadla from Brno. And those questions refer to him a lot because he tries to integrate radical ecology, and he's trying to look for the ways of exiting the trap. And we find elements of seeing live cinemas and working with realism, working with the concept of emptiness and technology. Hello to all of you. Can you hear me? Can you hear us? We don't see him moving, so we might hear him, but the picture visually froze. I hope Mr. Buraj was moving previously when listening. Now when he was oh, I see him moving. Can you hear us? And yes, we do. I hope the signal will be better. Can you hear me? I hope the signal is not freezing. Just continue. Thank you for granting me the floor. The original is unfortunately freezing up. Mr. Buraj, my suggestion to you, we don't hear you very well. In my introduction, I would like to link to my predecessors. Can you hear me, Mr. Buraj? I have to interrupt you.
Pane Buraj, jestli mě slyšíte, tak...
If you hear me, Mr. Buraj, we don't hear you at all. My suggestion, you have very low data flow. Try to switch off the camera so that we have better sound because we need it for interpretation. Let's suggest. And you would have to start from the beginning because we couldn't hear you at all. Once again, thank you for inviting me to the discussion. What I have been saying, I would like to link my speech to my predecessors and talk about conditions the cultural institutions are in. The previous panel was interesting for me, especially with the threat for culture and its imminent us experiencing new reality when talking about culture, schools, how the new framing of the work should be implemented. I believe that the biggest threat for cultural institution is making the view just an economic one, quantitative assessment of cultural institutions. We don't unfortunately hear the speaker very well. What my colleagues were talking about, how to link the management of the cities to management of theaters. So the figures we had to present were just the figures from the audience and percentage of the tickets sold. No one was interested in innovation, on further education.
O schopnost hledat screenových forem komunikace, jo? A že vlastně jediné, co bylo podstatné, byly tyhle tržby a návštěvnost, jo? A
what was important for us were the sales and the numbers of visitors. The previous speakers were speaking about the importance of digital streams. The interpreters have to apologize because there are some glitches in the line. We cannot hear the speaker. Apologies. The connection broke off. We cannot hear anything. Now let's hope it will get better. Mr. Buraj, we hope to have received the message from you. Please stay with us, stay connected, and maybe it will get better. And Anežka Bartlová wants to say something, and now she can respond to a number of issues which were articulated here. Thank you. Let me sum up what I now jotted down, what I prepared for the topic at hand. I understood the first panel focused more on the environment, on climate disruption. The second panel focuses rather on the pandemic, the current pandemic crisis, and I think that those two moments are linked. And for us, the people who work in the culture sector, this is the so-called teaser. Now, based on it, we will try to slow down, to reflect upon the possibilities. We will try to tackle the so-called overheating. And I'm not sure whether this term, overheating, is the correct one. I would rather say the enormous number of events which have been spewed on us. And this should be the moment to reflect upon. At the same time, I see the link to the pandemic, and many galleries had to close down due to that. And of course, opening exhibitions were also struck down. And that was a very interesting social experiment for the visual artists also, because they would invite so many people to the opening exhibition, and they were important for networking. What is very important, which will be important even in the future, is the underlining of precarization and in culture or of culture. And in visual art, this is a very important factor that influenced so many things, starting from the roles of people and also the roles of mitigation measures, and whether we want to actually stick by them. You might be afraid of getting a virus, and that's why you will try to actually proceed in accordance with the protection measures, health measures proclaimed by the government. And if I may proceed, then I'd like to say that there is another key aspect, especially important for theaters. Mr. Janeček mentioned that in the film industry. And that is the loss of the meaning. It might sound as a trite sentence, but it is important because we are speaking about approaches and about imagination that is actually used by the artists. And now we see the disruption of this phenomenon. And many artists are now without work. They used to work in a multiple of projects, and now they don't have anything. They don't know what to do. They have to leave their studios because they don't have the money to pay the rent, because they are not eligible for the government subsidy now. And that is something important for us, because an artist is somebody who has exhibitions. This is how we have perceived it all the time. So the question is, how long can you be an artist after you have finished exhibiting your work? So we have one exhibit in Prague, which is called an exhibition as an alibi. When it comes down to the environment, then I'm a member of the artistic feminist institution, which focuses on the environment and the reform measures in this area, where we focus on efficient and environmental art creation. And we have also initiated a movement which actually included many other institutions. We are also in touch with the City Hall of Prague and with the Ministry of Culture. We tried to actually formulate a vision for the environment, and we reached out to the director of the National Gallery of Prague, and we suggested that there should be an environmental ombudsman, and also environmental audits should be introduced. And this is what we presented to the City Hall of Prague, to the head of the cultural department, who was not very welcoming, who said we should come later with specific measures. We actually submitted those to him, but he was not enthusiastic about them. Last week we discussed governmental funds, governmental financing, and we discussed it with Artichoke organization, and then we also invited Milan Janeček from the Ministry of Culture, and we wanted to see something about the new policy for culture for the period of 2021 to 2025. And then what I expected and what actually what materialized then is that there was no discussion about climate or environmental policy. And when I pinned the officials down, they would not respond. And the hierarchy of institutions is very problematic because the highest authority which we have above us lacks a vision, and this was eye-opening to me personally because I expected they would have some strategy, at least a top-down strategy or a bottom-up strategy by the ministry. And this is how we tried to rectify the negative impact of the Corona crisis. And this is the lack of flexibility of the institutions which we actually are in touch with. We were also speaking about the importance of the role of municipalities. And I'm not sure whether there are some strategies in this regard. That's why we have to do these procedures ourselves, and hopefully we will get inspired by other colleagues. David Korecký actually mentioned that in his video. He said that it was important to do the networking, to establish contacts. I actually subscribe to this because this is very important. Another question is, however, what role an institution has to play. Thank you, thank you. This will be it. I was looking for comma or a full stop so that we could reach the other guests. Thank you for your remarks. And now, Jana, you wanted to actually pick on somebody. Well, I noticed that Mr. Buraj is again in touch with us, and Anežka Bartlová explained her vision here, and he might probably reflect on the role of institutions, etc., because our guests have been saying that we should not wait for the upper or superior institutions to reach out to us and to provide us the guidance, that we should be active. I hope I will have a better signal now. Buraj saying, I would like to follow on Anežka Bartlová, who actually mentioned the exhibition titled An Exhibition as an Alibi. I am afraid that many cultural institutions try to strive to justify their work, and they do that through the quantity of work they produce, and that is problematic. And you already related to this by speaking about overheated culture. And I would say that we have heard that term already. But I'm afraid that as a consequence, the smaller institutions will then be left on the side. And that should not be the case. I hope they will not be afraid to do what they are supposed to do, and that is to look for an experiment, to undergo a risk. We were speaking about an urgent situation which we are living in, and this is the context of the time, which is very important. If we forget to mention the perspective of an artist, and if we think that an artist is somebody who has to produce something all the time, then the artistic activity will become more banal, will become more trite. It will be equal to the Potemkin's villages. And that's why I think that it is very important, as has been mentioned by the previous speakers, that artistic activity also includes reflection of an artist, maintaining the relationships between the artist and the cultural institution and the public at large. And this is important. And if the management circles will only focus on the products, on the artworks, then they might actually disrupt this concept. Thank you. This is a good
When talking
remark.
about overheated culture, there is a special term called grant mechanism, which shows working constantly on new projects, new grants. So you are like Ouroboros, just trying to bite your own tail and moving in a vicious circle. Obviously, it might happen that we will be having the opportunity to think about it in these extraordinary times. Let me just rephrase all the terms that are popping up. Quantity and just consumption in terms of just showing results, presenting figures and supporting it with figures so that the artists are constantly producing new results, so that it's called like stress out of grant schemes and grant mechanisms and consumption circle. Have you come across something like that? Let me pose the question directly to you. When we talked about attempt for sustainable development, and Mr. Janeček mentioned shortening of the production cycle, when talking superficially at the showbiz on the top, so there would be shortening up of the results and production cycle. So, Mr. Janeček, do you believe that in this environment one really needs slowing down, or producing new results that will be at all our loudspeakers or applications for a short period of time. So whether in your area of professional interest that there is certain releasing of the mechanism. How do you see it, Mr. Janeček? It's a very nice question. Whether the need exists, I would say so. I believe the Americans would say that need doesn't exist. You know, we take the consumerism from the US. Google streaming, we everything have from the US. You know, we are just using their technology and consumption globally, worldwide. So it's not in the interest of the corporations, but when talking about the planet, it really helped the planet. And we know that showbiz free. It's just building it up one day, then dismantling it next day. I'm part of that scheme and cycle myself with my production and agency. We are too far in the public space from the environment and awareness, and we are too far from the solution. Anežka mentioned about the institutions, and I think she was right. The institutions will be really, I don't see flexibility on the first place, and that's why the institutions are criticized from us. So flexibility is so needed. One needs to be really flexicute in terms of adding some trust that the leadership is at the right place and that the leader wouldn't fear to be too flexible and be reproached. And I'm getting back to Mr. Buraj's comment about fear, because fear is bounding us. We are not able to play around, be creative, and a lot of artists left to play and be creative. As soon as they start their career, then obviously they devote their life to being artists, and then they don't worry about, you know, how to pay the rent, etc. And probably I would like to see a half-empty glass of water as an optimist that it's almost full, and to be at the limits of our powers. I have to admit that this crisis probably made me stronger compared to other crises. It means more creativity, increase of creativity, and to change the paradigm we used to live in pre-COVID pandemic. And you mentioned the special Polish term, grantosis, you know, fear from grants. I will be using it and copyright you. Anežka, I believe, wanted to react. So anyone else who wishes to comment, just raise your hand. We will try it with Jana to reflect it and then hand the floor over to you. Before I say so, we should mention Jamboard, which is in Canvas. The attendees, viewers, listeners can, within their screens, PCs, put their views on 2 questions that they will see. I have mentioned Jamboard. Let's grant the floor to Anežka. Thank you. Let me react to flexibility of institutions. I meant it differently, probably, compared to in terms of trying to shift your limit to the situation. I believe the same, you know, this flexibility as such as we need it. For me, flexibility means that to understand institutions should be doing educational role in one exhibition, you know, in an annual program with their own rules. And they might be adjusting those rules. So there is an important role, not just to recycle, but to show what it means. And institutions are spending more, consuming more employees. So that's the change. And there might be a bigger impact. Moreover, I wanted to react to the term grantomania, grantsman, the idea of inspiring element, but you have no place to live and nothing to eat, then you won't be very creative and you wouldn't be able to try to avoid it. So it's very important talking about the grantosis. There would be different types of calls. You know, Mr. Janeček mentioned there will be commercial entities applying for grants because it will be better for them to be non-profit ones compared to profitable ones because they wouldn't be ending up with loss. Very last sentence, so that I don't take up much of your space. We are trying to negotiate to get into the grant policy somehow so that there would be some ecology criteria. Models do work. For example, in Slovakia, they have a model that is able to do so, and psychological criteria as well. And that we have to wait for the institutions from the top to start functioning. The grant system of the Ministry of Culture limits how the whole scene will be operating, so that it's the very last thing. I just wanted to ask, you know, when you said, when you have nothing to eat, nowhere to live, do you think that will be a different problem, not in grants for culture? I just can't imagine that where we live in this comfort in the Czech Republic, we discuss culture, that someone would be so not well off. It's a different problem compared to the artist, you know, worldwide, when there is not such a support of culture compared to the Czech Republic, and people have somewhere to live and something to eat. I do understand your comment. I just try to find out a quick answer. For me, this is a part of the whole strategy. We should expect the ministry to define, or a city, depending on who is giving out or away, whether they want to redistribute everything via grants centrally or not. For example, funds for fine arts, it's extremely difficult compared to other ones or other areas of art. Other reactions from other panelists? Anyone wishes to react? Because we are coming to the end of the panel. Before we summarize, did you wish to? Microphone, please. Unmute yourself. Thank you. When we talked about the grants and what the institutions are doing, the institutions are filters in themselves. They try to retain something, collect something, but the institutions, compared to some flow stream or channels, that care for daily profit. The institutions can, from their stock, make accessible and make lively some items that we should come back to. We live in an era that is not linked with the pandemic and the virus, but the disproportion may be showing that we are getting into a situation that might be getting worse. So we all know that at each institution, gallery, there is each grant being processed, and we have huge institutions that have extreme influence, either public TV or private TV channels, so that you become a TV director, you know, what will be presented to the living rooms of thousands of millions of people, you know, the influence of such a manager in Czech TV doesn't imply that there should be like public tenders for those individuals to be appointed to their positions. And it's disproportional and it lasts. And I think it will be getting worse because the economic impacts favor the big ones compared to the small individuals or corporate or entities. So an institution should be perceived and analyzed from the perspective of the link to politics and its impact and influence, and think about how the care should be used for the public so that there is higher quality getting inwards. Ivan Buraj wishes to comment. The floor is yours. I have been thinking in my small room how to react to Yemi. The discussions in the creative potential of fear. I think it's a strange mythology that is going through the history of art. Fear and uncertainty, I would distinguish two types. Metaphysical fear that might be very truthful of our picture of our existence and very creative. I consider it to be the most inspirational source of my work. But then there is fear, social fear. And when talking about a place to stay and live and eat and to have something to eat, we, in our Center for Experimental Theatre, we tried to assess the influence of cultural institutions, and it might influence quality. What should be the quantitative parameters? There should be some public discussion, which I believe is not present. In our research, we have analyzed the German system of subsidies, went through various case studies from various cities. For example, German theatrical institutions of such a high quality, they have like a minimum guarantee of dignified social existence of the employees. And when you know, questioning whether you will be able to pay rent is not creative. Then you stop thinking about creation, but where to get monies for the rent. So it's like a minefield, time ticking bomb. You have to allocate time about thinking where to get the money, recalculate some interest rates, and it's nothing linked with creativity. For me, would be most creative, like, you know, having you know, washing the dishes and just not thinking about, you know, how to pay the water consumption. Jan Press wanted, or Yemi, just short reaction, and then Jan Press to follow. You have to realize, yeah, I agree, Ivan, with you. It makes sense, but we always talk towards everyone as if they are us. But you have introverts, extroverts, people who work well under pressure or drill, and each time was benefited, other people were benefiting last century. Each situation, each government just works out better for some individuals. To some people, it's an advantage, just there are new people coming up, and one has to realize it's going on and not, you know, what happened in the past, it would be happening again. Well, we have a chance that the history wouldn't have to repeat itself. They're obviously linked with a lot of problems, but it's the light at the end of the tunnel. Not that everything will change, but we can do the new setup. Ivan, just quick reaction. I agree, but we have to get used to it.
And that's why I would like to ask you whether you want to live in times which actually play to the hands of people who are actually very egoistic, and times which actually are characterized by inequality. Well, let me say, Jan Press, something about what Anežka Bartlová said. She mentioned meetings with state officials about environmental issues where the words climate or environment were never mentioned. This is important, but of course we have to be active ourselves, but on the other hand, we need government strategy for this. Now, speaking about the grant system, of course, there will be some aspects for awarding a grant, and such aspects might be sustainability, protection of the environment, and if these issues are not included, then it's problematic. And now we are in the midst of a crisis, and the cultural sector is such that the artists won't get their salary. We can compare it with a philharmonic orchestra, a musician who will not receive any salary. That is why we need a particular grant strategy or policy which will include the provision about giving the salary to an artist, visual artist, let's say, during a pandemic. this is just to explain the situation and to explain the notion of precariousness of art, because artists now have a difficult position. Of course, if you want to paint or create a painting, you need some time, and that time might be long. If you are an actor, that might not involve so much time. As a visual artist, you need some time for reflection before you create some painting. Of course, then it comes to the crunch, and then you have an exhibition. And if you do not have any painting, then you cannot have one. Thank you. Thank you. This marks the end of the second panel on the audit of culture. And I think the topics from the first panel, such as new narrative, care for others, cohesion, those have been eclipsed by the following discussion. This panel also wanted to address the way to whom any support should be given, and in accordance to what aspects. Because, of course, graduating from an artistic school or college should not give you a guarantee of a salary as an artist. Thank you for your contributions, for your questions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to say bye to our panelists, Anežka Bartlová, Vít Janeček, Yemi, Ivan Buraj, Jan Press. Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for responses, and we will try to develop them further. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Tak my jsme už ohlásili to, že za několik málo minut se budeme setkávat s dalšími.
We have already announced the third panel, and that will be the panel titled Perspective of the Artists. What does that mean? It means we will have Miřenka Čechová, Apolena Rychlíková, Adam Borzič, and Noemi Purkrabková as panelists. And the panel will start in 8 minutes, 7 minutes. That means 5 at 2:35 exactly. So you might grab some refreshments, and see you later. Thank you.